Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
Coming up on the show today, Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com runs down the major markets. He says the Russell 2000 is now the hottest show in town. He takes a look at what gold, silver, crude, and Bitcoin are doing. Ross also has a special offer for our listeners. Founder of Armstrong Economics, Martin Armstrong, gives us his take on President Trump's Thursday night address. Martin tells us why he doesn't think Canada will become the 51st state. He takes a look at the Dow, gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. Editor of the Hat Trick Letter, Jim Willie, gives us his view on the Iran war, the state of the AI space, where gold and silver are headed, and whether the U.S. military will get involved in the next election. Now, let's get on with the show. My guest is Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Ross, what can you tell us about what happened on the stock markets?
Well, it was a quieter week until Friday, and then markets started to give up some ground. You know, we've been just basically going sideways as far as the S&P is concerned here since the middle of May. NASDAQ has been the weak one on the downside. It just continues to erode away after having been the leader for many, many months. The best market out there has been the Russell 2000, the small caps. That one made a new all-time high this week. It did reverse at the end of the week, but overall, that's where the money has been moving to. And you know, we've been talking about it being a rotational style of market. The AI stocks have they've rolled over. I guess they got bid up too far, and it was time for a big breather over there. So, you know, the money's always looking for a home, and right now the home has been over in the Russell 2000. Now, the G2 money supply that I watched, the worldwide money supply, that one as a leading indicator had been looking for an interim high right in here in the early part of July. And then the next good move on the upside doesn't occur until we get into August. Actually, around the 6th of August is where that model, which is a leading indicator, that's when that model starts to turn bullish again and takes us into October. So I'm going to be watching for interim lows and some good oversold signals here as we, today's the 17th of July, so tack on another 3 or 4 weeks here, and we can be looking at some buying opportunities in the broad markets. And as always, there's going to be individual stocks or sectors that provide opportunities.
What's going on with crude?
Crude, last week we're talking about it pushing towards that $80 was a pretty reasonable target. We did have just all the perfect weekly and daily signals for a bottom in the first week of July when we were down at 66.5. And so the $80 target looked to be reasonable. This week we got up to just shy of 82. And if anything, it's now getting a little ahead of itself on the upside. The oil stocks have not been participating as much. You had to be over into the refiners to really see the Valeros of this world, which is where the big strength was in the oil complex. But take a look at the XEG on the Canadian side. It's had a reasonable run from 24 up to 26. And the XLE over on the U.S. side had a decent move as well. Nothing, huge on the upside, but from 53 up to 57.5. So, we're into a trading market. So you take advantage of the oversold conditions and then lighten up when the strength gets ahead of itself.
What's going on with gold and silver?
I've been looking for some basing activity in here and with an upside bias. Both markets hit their 20-day moving averages for resistance on the first rally about a week and a half ago, and have now got back down and tested the lows. The gold market closing off around just over 400, or just over 4,000. Silver is having a tougher time. It's around 56 and hasn't managed to quite hold the lows that it had. I guess the negative aspect of this is that when we look at the stocks, if you look at the GDXJ on the gold side, or on the silver, the SILJ, those ETFs are just continuing to erode away. So there's nothing in the way of upside leadership for now. It's just the metals that are doing their own thing. The gold-silver ratio is moving quite significantly in favor of gold right now. So if there's anything to be looked at, the golds would be the one to look at, not over in silver. We'll probably get some good oversold numbers as far as silver is concerned, but that's down the road. Seasonality would suggest that we should be putting in upside action. So once you see signs of a reversal, you might want to go with it.
What's happening with the U.S. and Canadian dollars?
U.S. dollar has topped out right where we thought it would the end of June, and it's had two waves of selling in here. We've come from 101.5 down to 100.25, getting a decent bounce there back to 100.5. Nothing big, nothing to write home about, but overall the U.S. dollar was in need of a correction. I'm happy to see this here. And the other currencies have been holding in reasonably well. The euro bottomed as the U.S. dollar topped, and it's tacked on a little bit on the upside. The yen has just put in a double bottom. But the Canadian dollar, I guess for once in a blue moon here, has had some decent strength along with the oil market. So we've gone from about 70 and change up to 71.5. This is the best rally we've had in months in the Canadian dollar. And, it comes from some extremely oversold readings. Not a surprise on the upside. And if the oil market wants to continue here, it will probably drag the Canadian up with it.
What's happening with Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is just got into a flat market here. We bottomed out in the first part of June, went and retested the low, so that was around 60,000, and the retest was at the early part of July. Since then, it's just been a back and forth piece of action. I don't see anything on the horizon that's telling me where the next significant move is. So I'll just sit back and watch the technicals. Right now, it's got some resistance at the 50-day moving average. So that's around 65,000, just over. And if it can push through there, that would be something of note. But for now, there's I don't think any trading opportunities there. The one market that's been doing well in terms of bottoming out was the bond market. The long bond is at 111 and change now. So this is down from 114 in early part of July and up from the 110 and change. Looks as though it's got potential on the upside. So that, and if you're trading on the ETFs, the TLT would be an item to take a look at there.
Ross, do you still have a special offer for our listeners?
Special offer good through this weekend. Chartsandmarkets.com. You'll find a link there for the special 25% off for new annual subscribers.
Ross, thank you so much for the update.
Good to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Coming up, Martin Armstrong next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, available online at armstrongeconomics.com. He's speaking to us from Florida. Marty, welcome back to This Week in Money.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You have an upcoming event in Tampa, Florida on July 25th. Can you tell us about it and how our listeners can attend?
Well, what this is, I've been actually asked for a long time by attendants from our regular conferences to do something for how the world really works and this wave is becoming like for the next generation, because everything they're taught in school is just falling apart. And then I won't mention the university, but one of the top 5 in the world had asked me to teach. I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "I'm not really a teacher." I said, why are you even asking me? And they actually did admit, they said, "Well, what we teach we know doesn't work." I said, "Well, that's the first step." But they said they had asked other people that were in the hedge fund industry globally, and he said, "Nobody wants to come back." I said, "Well, who does want to go back to a classroom?" And, so I promised I would do something like this, and everybody will get a textbook. We're not going to live stream because we're trying to bring the cost down to absolutely bare minimum. So I'm not really making a profit on it. So afterwards there will be a video available, but live streaming is just would jack the prices up dramatically. And the textbook that I had to write for this will be available also. But after the conferences. But it's mainly about how the world really functions and what the reason all these economic theories have fallen, basically to dust is because when they were created, we had a gold standard. So they never considered a fluctuation in currency at all. And then largely you have Marx and Keynes who magnified the problem, but from the standpoint of assuming that the government can manipulate us and eliminate recessions and depressions, as they were telling me when I was in school. And you have Larry Summers, who wrote a piece for the Washington Post, who even admitted is that no economists they can't even forecast a recession, and he says nobody's been able to do that since World War II. So what are they? All they're teaching is really politics, and a lot of them focus on income inequality. Well, there's inequality between governments too. Okay, and it all depends upon productivity. You don't want to pay me $30 million a year to throw a football in the Super Bowl. Everybody's got different talents. Brain surgeons get a lot of money because there aren't that many people that can do it. So it is supply and demand, as opposed to somebody can just sweep, take a broom and sweep the floor. Pretty much anybody can do that. So we have to understand that in economics, we've been prejudiced tremendously by these academics that follow Marx and Keynes. And the focus is domestic, as if, well, we'll raise interest rates or lower interest rates, that, which doesn't work anyhow. But, when I was doing a book back in '86, The Greatest Bull Market, I had to read all the newspapers going into 29 and afterwards to see what they were actually talking about. And it was very interesting because before 29, in a free market system, when interest rates went up, it was bullish because they said that proves there's still a demand for money. And afterwards, because Keynes comes in and socialism takes place, it's no longer about the market. It's like, what does the government want us to do next? Oh, they'll raise interest rates because they want us to spend less. Or they lower interest rates because they want us to borrow. It's no longer about the free market. It's about what government wants to do to us next. That's it. And that's why all these things are failing, because they don't understand. If you think the stock market will double next year, you'll pay 20% interest. But if you don't think it's going to go up 1%, you won't borrow at 1%. It's a difference in perception. And then they don't understand inflation. You have to wonder, does anybody, in government even understand what the hell they're doing? I mean, inflation, for example, can be just currency inflation. I mean, if you've got a building there in Vancouver, you sell it to somebody else in Vancouver, the money supply doesn't change. It just goes from your pocket to the other guy's. Okay, but if I come in from Florida and I buy your building, I got to bring in the money. So if I bought it for $1 million, I'm increasing your domestic money supply. I bring in $1 million. Okay, and this is what they don't understand, that central banks cannot control the money supply. They're not, the be-all and end-all, and because there are external forces. And the same thing with what made North America successful was World War I and II, because all the money came over here. London used to be the financial capital of the world. You can go on eBay and buy, Chinese bonds that were issued in British pounds from, before 1914. Now they issue things in dollars. Because why? Because that's where they can sell it. Okay, there's a lot of institutions there in New York, all these emerging markets. They issue debt in dollars because they're trying to sell it into that market. And before World War I, it was issued in pounds. So we have to understand this stuff. Things have changed. It's not, all the same. And all the theories from Keynes and Marx never considered currency. And it never considered international capital flows. And the whole idea was just simply about what government can do to manipulate us to achieve their goals. That's it. And that's what's falling apart. And, universities still teaching the old stupid, Keynesian models, which have not worked. I mean, I know Paul Volcker, and in 1978 he did a book which is kind of rare. It's hard to find. Will go for a few $100 at least, but it's called Rediscovery of the Business Cycle. And Paul said in 1978, after the 74-75 crash and stagflation set in, and he came out and said, Keynesian economics failed. There you had OPEC raise the price of oil. That rippled through the entire economy because the inflation was coming from a cost push version, not demand, not speculative demand. And so they ended up calling it stagflation, which under Keynesian economics should never have happened. And that's why I say these old theories, they don't work, yet they still teach them. So it's quantity, of money. It's, irrelevant. All these things, they have external factors. Milton Friedman criticized the Fed because all the money was moving in to the U.S. after World War I, and he criticized them for not monetizing it. They just stuck it in vaults because they were afraid of inflation. So these are things that, we have to re-examine. And that's what this conference is about. It's more of not necessarily forecasting as one of our normal WECs. It's how everything is connected. How does the world really function? Because we have to, come to grips with this stuff. And like I said, one of the top universities even asked me to teach and admitted what they teach does not work. And I said, fantastic. That's the first step to clearing up a lot of this nonsense.
Thursday evening, President Trump addressed the nation. Are relations with China and other involved countries likely to change following that address?
Well, I don't think so in general. The main thing is that you have the Democrats trying to spin it that, what he said about the 2020 election, that's all been debunked, etc., which is simply really actually not true. But our computer had projected that it would be rigged, and I think it's going to get much worse as we go into 26 and probably reach a real pinnacle around 28.
President Trump also focused on domestic players in election fraud. Are more arrests likely to happen even in Democrat states?
I wouldn't doubt that. We have, it's interesting how, like MS Now said, Trump is making this stuff up. It's all debunked about 20. However, the Russians did interfere in 2016. I mean, it's all just such partisan nonsense. Actually, I've spoken to many people, and the ones that are really interfering in the elections a lot are the Israeli lobby. They've been targeting anybody that's anti-Israel, like Massey. So, there's clearly interference taking place. And for the Democrats to spin it to say it's all a conspiracy theory from Trump. However, Hillary was right. It's just nonsense.
One way or another, do you think President Trump will be successful in securing the 2026 midterms against fraud along with elections going forward?
Everything is just becoming so polarized, domestically as well as internationally. But, our computer has shown that the 2026 election is going to have a lot of rigging involved, but it's showing it's going to be very tight. It's not showing an overwhelming victory for either side.
Does the U.S. have to bring in a third-party observer to make sure their elections are fair?
This is becoming a huge problem everywhere. Anybody that thinks that elections are fair, no matter what country you look at, are really kind of fools at this stage. Even you take what's been going on in Europe. The EU interfered in in the English referendum, where Scotland was to, wanted a referendum to leave, they interfered in basically the election in Italy, and just interfered. And these things are documented. They interfered in the Romanian election, overthrew the guy that the people actually voted and claimed, Russian interference. They actually said publicly that if the AfD had won in Germany, they would have overthrown that. In Hungary, all my sources there said that was rigged. And as soon as they got rid of Orban, you have Ursula standing up and saying that no single country should be able to prevent us from doing what we want to do ever again. Yet that was the promise that would require a unanimous vote. My staff in Ukraine said the same thing about Zelensky, that he never really won. That election was all rigged. I don't know if there are any fair elections going forward anymore. It's always about lies, propaganda, and Carney talked about, Trump wants to annex Canada and the 51st state. That's all nonsense. Trump couldn't do that. And even if Alberta wanted to join the United States as the 51st state, it would turn into a food fight in Congress, because every state gets 2 senators, and it would disrupt the balance. And people I've spoken to, from even the State Department, said they would never allow that, because then the Democrats would argue that Puerto Rico and Guam should come in as states. So I don't know if you're going to see any kind of a fair election. Our computer is just showing it's going to get progressively worse going into 2028.
Do you think the 300-year-old British Empire is being destroyed and replaced by the American Empire?
Not in the same way, but we have to, again, understand the global implications of this. We have our neocons, China has theirs, Russia has theirs, and, it's all about power and glory and all the rest of this stuff. But Britain had more of what started that Commonwealth idea was actually the French physiocrats. And it all stemmed from the definition of what is money. And the physiocrats basically determined that wealth is land because it's agriculture. But look, agriculture in the 19th century and before was at least 70% of the economy. This is all before the Industrial Revolution. So if land is wealth, then you conquered as much of it as you possibly could. It wasn't really until the very late period of the 19th century when the Industrial Revolution was starting to take place. But then Marx also didn't understand that. People, if you planted food on your property and you sold it, you benefited from your labor. And he looked at it like, now you took a job in a factory and he's exploiting your labor. He didn't understand the transition from agriculture to industrialism. And so I think the United States is, we definitely have these people that we call neocons that keep pushing for power, and you have the Wolfowitz doctrine that we should prevent any country from rising again to challenge the United States, like Russia or whatever. And It's all fiction. I mean, China is rising very rapidly, so what are you going to do? Start World War III? But most of these people are very dangerous. Ukraine is nothing but a proxy war. You had John McCain over there during Maidan, telling the people, rise up against your government, overthrow them, and we're with you. I mean, can you imagine if somebody from Russia or China stood on the steps of the Capitol in Washington and said, overthrow your government, we're with you? I mean, that's the arrogance. So to some of those people, yes, they think it's, their moment in the sun to create an American empire or something. But it's not quite the same as the British one, which was more occupying land. These people are more trying to exert, political and military power.
Is there currently a worldwide push for communism?
Yes. I mean, we go through these cycles. You see it in the United States, but you also see it in Europe. And what it is basically this idea that government should control everything and make it much better. So the downside to that is you see it in Europe, for example, a massive attack on free speech. And London ended up with more people they put in prison for something they posted on Facebook than Russia. So it's definitely, you see it with Van Damme in New York. I mean, this same idea has been tried so many times, and it fails. And what they always say about communism and socialism is you can vote your way into it, but you got to shoot your way out. And it is a serious issue, but look, you have a lot of people because the economy is, the government has become too big. If you look at Europe, instead of looking at debt to GDP, look at government spending as a percent of GDP. The United States is about 35%. Europe is at 52%. So 52% of every euro you make goes to feed a bureaucrat. And they produce nothing. So, I mean, that's why Russia failed, China failed. You talk to people I know from Eastern Europe who came here, they're very upset. They said, what's happening here is exactly what I fled from. Attacks on freedom of speech, things of this nature. I mean, COVID, look at what they did there. I mean, it's like, if you dared say anything against the government position, you were, debanked everything. This is authoritarianism. And it's part of that trend that you're talking about, communism. You even had the World Economic Forum coming out, you'll own nothing and be happy. That's communism. So you always go through these things, and it's not something new. All right? Right in the Ten Commandments, what does it say? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Okay? That is the cornerstone of socialism. He's got more than me, that's not fair. This has been outlawed going back to Sumerian times. And in ancient times, you had Sparta. They never even issued a coin because they were a communist state. And they started the Peloponnesian War against Athens, who was the liberal state. And that's what influenced Marx. So you'll see Athens never issued even any money. They didn't want people to accumulate wealth. So, I mean, these ideas are not something unique or just confined to, current times. They've been going on for thousands of years.
Do you think Mark Carney was selected to be Prime Minister of Canada by the globalists to take on President Trump?
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you at Davos, when Trump was elected in 2016, they got into a real tizzy. They were very concerned that, oh my God, the people could actually vote us out of power. And that's when they started really becoming much more authoritarian. And look, Carney is a flat out right globalist. He wants to line you up with, with the EU, wants China as a trading partner more than the United States. I mean, what planet is he on? I disagree with Trump with the whole, a lot of the tariff stuff. But Carney blew the 51st state stuff completely out of the water. I mean, it's nonsense. I've spoken to people in that, they would not ever allow Canada to become a 51st state or Alberta. Why? Because you would create a political firestorm in the U.S. if they allowed Alberta and BC to come in. The Democrats that's going to change the Senate. Okay, because Alberta would get 2 senators. Every state would get 2 senators. All right. So that would change the political balance. And the people from the State Department, at least admit to me anyhow, then the problem would become the Democrats would want to allow Puerto Rico to become a state and Guam. Okay, so it would turn into a real food fight. So there was no way Canada could become the 51st state one way or another. I mean, it would change the entire politics. Whatever Trump wants to talk about, it's just rhetoric. That's about it. But Carney seized on that and made people think that he could, seize Canada or whatever. I mean, that's completely, off the wall. They would never allow Alberta, because they would figure, particularly Alberta, would vote Republican. So Democrats wouldn't tolerate that. So it would become a huge food fight.
Canada is implementing one censorship bill after another, along with the continued push for gun control. Canada is spending a lot of money in other countries, especially Ukraine, instead of on the people of Canada that need help. It's giving big money to mainstream media, offshoring building of new BC ferries to China and 12 new submarines to Germany. Mass migration is showing up all across Canada and not adopting to Canadian culture. Land titles being given to native Indian bands in BC with secret agreements. In Vancouver, Mark Carney is giving real estate developers a $3.2 billion condo bailout. It sounds like medically assisted suicide is being offered as a health care option. Is the 51st state the only option to get Canada back on track?
Well, I mean, economically, it probably would be beneficial, yes. Politically, impossible, but the biggest problem that we have is that before FDR, if you look at the Federal Reserve, why does it have all these branches? Because you can go online, look at a 1927 newspaper, and you'll see each branch was independent. So they would say everybody's at 3%, but New York's at 4. They understood, away from the panic in 1907. There was a San Francisco earthquake, so there was a shortage of money in San Francisco, but an excess money in New York. So the capital moved. But as it moved to San Francisco, then it created a shortage on the East Coast. So you had, banks starting to go down and over there. So the Fed was designed correctly in 1913 with all these branches and everybody was independent. It was Roosevelt in 1935 to sell his socialistic agenda, usurped all that power, put in a chairman of the Fed. Before that, it was just the Treasury. So he created the Fed chair, and suddenly it became one size fits all. And I've dealt with Canada for a long time, and I remember back in the 80s, there was a real estate boom in Toronto, and the Bank of Canada was raising interest rates because of the inflation there. Meanwhile, they were putting putting farmers and miners into bankruptcy on the West Coast. They're different economies. All right. We always called it in the States the Texas-New York arbitrage. When things were doing really well for Texas, oil prices were high, inflation was high, and they were rolling in the cash. New York was complaining on the opposite side. So we always called it the New York, Texas arbitrage. You've got the same issue. You're more commodity-oriented on the West Coast, exactly opposite of the East Coast. All right, and then you have the craziness of your climate change nonsense that they push through. There are not even any pipelines from Alberta to the East Coast. So the East Coast still imports oil from the Middle East. All right, so, and one size does not fit all. You can't raise interest rates because of something in Toronto without considering what you're doing to Alberta and BC. This is the whole problem with this whole socialistic, globalist agenda. And they, they think that to retain power, the more free it gets, the more power they lose. So it's always clamping down on free speech, things of this nature. And you're seeing it rising in civil unrest pretty much everywhere anymore. And Europe is a real basket case. I mean, Carney wants to take you into the EU. I'm the guy they called to create the friggin' euro. Okay? I dealt with them at the very beginning. I set it up. I said, this is how we create a currency. Okay? And you had to consolidate the debt. If you consolidated the debt, made it a federal type debt, you could compete with the dollar. But Helmut Kohl, a Chancellor of Germany at the time, he admitted before he died that he acted like a dictator. And he said if he allowed the German people to vote, he would have lost 7-3. So, despite them saying that we live in a democracy, that's complete BS. He took Germany into the EU didn't allow the people to vote. He assumed that they would be mad if they consolidated the debt because maybe they'd be bailing out Greece and Italy. So he insisted that everybody retains their own debt. So the euro was never created to compete with the dollar. And I warned him it was not. All right. And as a trader, I can pick up the phone and say, buy me $10 billion worth of U.S. treasuries. No problem. Europe, I got to still make the same decision as if the euro didn't exist. Do I want Greece? Do I want Italy? Do I want maybe France or Germany, Austria perhaps? You still have to make the same decision as if the euro didn't exist. And I said, we've got 50 states, a single currency, fine. They all use U.S. dollars, but every state pays a different interest rate according to their credit rating. This is what's going to happen in Europe. I warned them. And that's why Europe has never been able to compete with the dollar. Just look at the GDP growth of Italy. It's 0.5%. Germany, 0.8%. U.S., flirts with 4%. I mean, Europe is in dire straits. This is why they need war. You got Macron. My sources right in Paris, they call him the Petite Napoleon. And he keeps pushing for sending in troops to Ukraine and everything else. And I've said on podcasts for more than a year that he's been pushing for war, and he assumed that they could just conquer Russia, get the $75 trillion they have in natural resources in the ground, and then Europe would rise again like the Roman Empire, and Canada and the United States would be reduced to the subservient colonies we should have remained. And when I would say this, people say, oh, come on, he can't say that. He can't believe it. And I say he does. Okay, that you can look up, the head of NATO came out a couple months ago. He didn't use Macron's name. What he said was, if you think you can conquer Russia without the United States, you are dreaming. Macron is a very dangerous person. All right. He flew over to Beijing before Trump got there. He then told them that he had no intention of interfering in any military action outside of Europe. So only Russia. All right. Forget the Middle East. They're not sending anybody there. But he also told Xi, do what you want with Taiwan. They will not interfere. So he gave a green light for China to take Taiwan. That's why when Trump got there, that is what he put on the table. Where do you stand? And Macron has told everybody in Europe, you can Google this up too. We don't need the United States. France exited NATO back in the 60s. They have their own nukes that are not part of NATO. He has said France will provide the umbrella for Europe. And he also offered to put nuclear arms on German planes. That's why they call him the Petite Napoleon. He thinks that he can rise and France will then rule Europe again. And this is why they keep pushing for war. I don't see any hope of peace realistically in Ukraine. They don't want it. Every time there has been close to a peace agreement, Boris Johnson from London hops on the plane, flies over to Kiev, and tells them he's not allowed to do it. I even warned the White House that, because we had people that staff in Kiev and in Donetsk, and Boris Johnson hopped on a plane, went over there, told Zelensky that the meeting that he was going to have with Trump was not to take place there in Ukraine, and he was to insist that he was going to Washington. And that when he got into the Oval Office, he was to embarrass Trump to keep the money flowing to fund the war that Europe wants with Russia and Ukraine. And so I warned them in D.C. I said he's coming over and he's there deliberately to embarrass Trump, all to keep the money flowing. And that's why you saw that meeting turned into another food fight, yelling at each other, etc. I mean, Zelensky was not there for peace. He was there to create a scene. And that was all at the direction of Boris Johnson.
Do you think Trump's plan is to have Cuba, Greenland, and Canada become part of the U.S.?
I understand the Greenland issue, that it's really part of North America, not Europe. As far as Cuba is concerned, and even Venezuela, look, that's the neocon that he's got there, Rubio, and he's Cuban. And look at stuff that he has said well before he got to the White House. He's always wanted to go after Cuba. This is a personal vendetta. The same thing with Venezuela. And look, Israel, the same thing. I mean, no foreign leader has ever been escorted into the Situation Room. Never. Netanyahu went straight in. And this was the neocons, I believe also maybe Trump's son-in-law, all pushing for war with Iran. This is where, this is the world we live in. A lot of people just exercising personal vendettas, and they deliberately seek power to manipulate society. That's what's, unfortunately what's going on.
It seems like there's a tug of war on for Canada between the European Union, China, and the U.S. Do you think the United States will prevail?
I do think Canada will split. You have to understand that this is simply the world we live in. Europe will divide as well. And even the United States. I mean, politics has become so viral in a way. You have, if you look at the United States, the Democrats will shoot down and argue against whatever the Republicans do, regardless if it's good, bad, or indifferent. All right, it's like if you say the sky's blue, I have to say it's red. So it's you're seeing the same thing in Canada there. I mean, Carney is a very serious risk to Canada long term. He wants to take you into the EU. I mean, just look at their economic growth. I mean, it's a tiny fraction of the United States. Economically, it makes no sense whatsoever. But this is a personal vendetta from a globalist that Carney's carrying out against Trump. Simple as that.
In the middle of summer, Vancouver City Hall is trying to ram through a giant 15-minute city plan. Vancouver, BC is also listed as a C40 city. Is this happening in other big cities, and are these 15-minute city plans a good idea?
No, look, most of this is all propaganda. And, when I was a kid, it would snow, and it was, you get 3 feet of snow. I remember my father sticking me out the window just so I could, dig the snow out from the front door so we could get out. But, so we get this nonsense all the time. Oh, it's warmer today than it was when I was a kid, so therefore we must have caused it. As if we're in charge of the entire world and the planet. Down here in Florida, we get red tides once in a while in the Gulf, and a politician's running, vote for me, and I'll put laws against these farmers with their fertilizer that causes red tide. I just Googled the red tide. The first one reported was 1642 by the Spanish, long before there were farmers and chemicals. But, they don't know what the hell they're talking about, but they always put it up. I wrote a piece about Iran. They're saying, the water shortages is global warming. Really? They have a regular, roughly 250-year cycle that goes back into ancient times. a third of the population dying from no water. I mean, these things are historically been around for a long time. These 15-minute cities is all based upon this. The guy that did the movie on Me, the Forecaster, also did the movie on Klaus Schwab, The Forum. And I know, I mean, Nigel Farage even came and spoke at our conference in Rome in 2019. And he said, of course I'm here. He's the alternative to Davos. I know Klaus for a long time. And the whole COVID thing was a scam. Okay? I didn't get vaccinated, told my family not to get vaccinated. Why? Because Klaus was telling people several months in advance, before anybody heard the word COVID, a virus is coming. Okay? They sold the stock markets because they thought it was going to crash, etc. And the whole thing was to lock everybody down to save the planet. He wanted to start these 15-minute cities, prevent people from driving to work. It was all this fictional climate change stuff. Okay, and you're seeing it again. I mean, India, Europe is now talking about locking people down because of an energy crisis. Once they get away with it one time, it's in that quiver and they pull it out and shoot that arrow again. And so 15-minute cities, all this, it's still part of this globalist agenda.
Once an Iran deal gets done, are we likely to see lower energy prices for the foreseeable future along with lower price inflation?
Probably not. Iran is not the only problem. Ukraine is a major problem. You have Zelensky attacking all the refineries, etc., in Russia. He and Netanyahu are two peas in a pod. They don't think twice about anybody else but themselves. And Trump just told Netanyahu, get your troops out of Lebanon and Syria. Netanyahu has deliberately tried to prevent any kind of a peace deal with Iran. He's up for running for election in October. He probably will do it. Okay, but his opposition is criticizing him in Israel already, saying you've accomplished nothing. You said there would be regime change. There's nothing. They still have their nukes, etc. Okay. The polls in Israel against Netanyahu are at 61% against him. We've had staff in Ukraine. Nobody with half a brain believes that Zelensky really won. He was handpicked to start war. And he won't go for an election, won't allow elections because he knows he would lose. Okay? But here you have the Strait of Hormuz shut down. But Iran is basically playing 3D chess. When COVID happened, oil went down to $6.50. And so the Gulf states couldn't fund themselves. So they borrowed extensively. Most people don't realize, but they got debt out the wazoo like the rest of us. Okay? So Iran, we have offices in Dubai. They sent more missiles and drones at Dubai than they did Israel. Why? because that's become the financial capital. All right? Because Switzerland was confiscating money from anybody that was Russian, the money has left. Switzerland is no longer trustworthy. So the money moved to Dubai and Singapore. So they sent more missiles and drones to Dubai than Israel because it's the financial center. And they built a $30 billion AI facility there. They attacked that. When they did, they didn't permanently damage it, but they took it offline for about a week. You couldn't even get anything to do with the bank. All right, so then they were attacking the Gulf refineries. So it's more than just the Strait of Hormuz. You attack the refineries, and they can't even fill up a tanker. Then you have Zelensky. Trump, reduced sanctions on Russia to help the energy prices. And Zelensky says, I don't care what you're doing or what anybody else wants. I'm not allowing that. So he became very aggressive and started attacking all the refineries. Russia's exports did decline by 40%. Okay. So he could care less what happens to the rest of the world. It's now pretty much documented that Ukrainians were the ones behind blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. Why any European would give them 10 cents, I don't know. They got to be brain dead. I mean, all the economic decline of Germany is all because of Ukraine. Energy prices went up dramatically. They cut off the gas. All right. Then they were attacking the gas lines going into Slovakia, Hungary, etc. And then the Europeans put sanctions on Russia. And you wonder why Europe is falling apart? They need war desperately, and they keep this nonsense up. Oh, Putin wants to invade, take Europe. For what? They have nothing. They have no energy, no gold. All you get is a bill for walking in. That's it. All right. However, the other way around, invading Russia to grab all their natural resources, Hitler tried it, Napoleon tried it, and the little Napoleon, the petite Napoleon wants to do it too. I mean, it doesn't end. Russia is the richest country in the world from a natural resource perspective. Europe has absolutely nothing of value to warrant walking in. Nuke it, fine, because there's nothing there afterwards anyhow. But as far as conquering it, for what? For what purpose? And Carney is just a globalist who is bought into all that nonsense. And he wants to take you into the EU, and you're going to find yourself drafted in there. So this is where we're at.
Israel continues to be a hot button topic. What do you think is happening with Israel?
It's the main thing is that it's a political contest. They have elections in October, and U.S. has elections in November, and Russia has elections in September. So this 3-month period is going to be crazy. But I do not see Netanyahu just walking away and into the sunset and retire. He went to school in Philadelphia. I grew up in that area. He went to grade school and high school. He hung out with the Crystals, and Irving Kristol is the one that started the whole neocon movement. So, I mean, his whole life has been nothing but to destroy Iran. He even quotes the Bible on that. But So I don't see this as working out very well. He's done everything he could to prevent any peace deal with Iran. And I wouldn't put it past him from rigging the elections in October, because I just don't see this guy walking away quietly. I just don't see it. He's got his whole life is based upon war with Iran.
Home prices are dropping in Canada and the U.S. How bad could it get?
We're in a global recession, which is not going to bottom until about 2028. And this is part of the problem with these old economic theories and governments, etc. They don't understand what makes it move, and it's confidence. If you have no faith in the future, you're not going to buy something. Okay, and you got right now. This is where we're at. It's people are contracting. Energy prices are up. They're not going to see them come down, and as war escalates, our computer's been showing that, we're going into wars, and this is more like brush fires. I call it like World War III, but it's not like us against one adversary. It's brush fires. So you're seeing China, Taiwan, North Korea versus the South, Middle East. Then you've got, Ukraine. One of their leaders came out and said, Moscow will fall. They want to destroy Russia. This isn't about pushing them out of the Donbass. This is an outright war against Russia. And the Kremlin, you can check, I think it was last week or maybe the week before. The Kremlin has been forced to change the definition of what they're doing. Before, it was a special operation just to defend the Donbass. Now they have changed it, and they said, we are at war with Ukraine. So I don't see this as calming down. And housing prices are not going to rise as long as people don't have faith in the future. And it's going to get darker before the light shines, and that's not going to come until about 28.
Hearing 6,000 patents that were hidden for years are going to be released. Could there be a lot of game changers for society in there?
Most likely, yes. There are a lot of different things that can change the game per se in so many different areas. So I think that will be helping the more boom times after coming out of a economic recessionary low in 2028.
AI data centers, flock cameras, 5G, 6G, cars that drive themselves. Is there any way to turn back their growing surveillance state?
Probably not, because the more they realize there's a risk of them losing power, the more they want to see and listen to everything we do. And unfortunately, the technology today allows them to do a lot more than they used to be able to do historically.
Is the U.S. dollar still the go-to currency during times of turmoil in the world?
Pretty much, mainly because it's the deepest economy. This is why I know people have been calling for the crash of the stock market, but they don't. Again, that's just a purely domestic analytical view. We've got offices everywhere from China to the Middle East. And I can tell you that when you have clients around the globe, you see how capital moves. The more missiles going back and forth, a lot of money left Dubai and headed straight to the U.S. stock market. When you see the Dow lead, that's the big foreign money coming in and parking. They're not going to buy the startups or something like that. They buy the blue chips. They don't have to worry about, the company going down or something like that, and then they lose their job because they, took a fly on a startup or something like that. So the big money wants the conservative stuff. And this is why the U.S. stock market has gone up to record highs. Despite for the last year at least, it's going to crash any day now. Listen to me. This is what they say. And they've been wrong consistently because they don't understand the capital flows from outside that come in and change the domestic view. Same thing happened with Tokyo. And from a foreign perspective, all right, you would understand, all right, as the dollar rises and the stock market rises, you benefit from the currency and the stock market. All right, you have the opportunity to make money on a currency side where an American does not. So going into Tokyo in 1989 bubble, a foreigner made at least 20% more on the currency on top of the stock market. This is why I'm saying, this conference that I'm doing this weekend, or next week, it's about understanding how the world really functions. And money will move simply because of these 10, 20, 30, 40% moves in currency. Forget what it's going into. Stock markets, real estate, or whatever, that's irrelevant. A lot of the capital moves based upon the currency view first. And we have to understand these things.
President Trump predicted the Dow will hit 100,000 by the end of his term. Do you agree with him?
No, not really. The only way that would happen is if you start nuking, Europe, etc., and other places to send that much money over here that it's the only place in town. Then that's the only way such a number would be possible. But that's just generally rhetoric.
Gold and silver are continuing in a downtrend. Does Socrates think gold and silver are likely to see new highs ahead?
Yes, but we're probably not, looking at, we're most likely going to see a continued decline here in July, maybe into the first couple weeks of August or so. As I said, you've got elections coming up. My main concern in Russia is that Putin is probably the only intelligent guy at the table. And by Zelensky attacking refineries and long-range, thing at this, he's under a lot of pressure. Either he gets aggressive or he will be replaced. And Putin is probably the most responsible person. You replace him and you're going to get one of their versions of a neocon. Just like we have John Bolton, who probably would invade Canada to get 3 Russians, And you got Medvedev and others that keep coming out and saying, when are you going to take this serious? They advocate for nuking Kiev. The U.S. did it. Let's end this war. Nuke the place. Putin is very responsible and he doesn't want to go down that road. But there are others that do. And so my concern is to pay attention to that. You've got the September elections in the Duma in Russia, and if that turns more against him, they can impeach him, and he just gives up and walks away, or they replace him one way or another. But there are a lot of others that want serious, for him to escalate this thing seriously. And honestly, I believe that Zelensky knows that, and he's taking orders from NATO. Attack everything you possibly can to force him to take action. And they, so they can stand up and say, rally around the flag, Russia's evil, they attacked us. Yet you have Boris Johnson on the front page of the Norwegian press publicly admitting we are in a proxy war with Russia. So he's not even hiding it.
From the beginning of May through the end of June, the Canadian dollar was doing a waterfall in the charts. So far in July, it's moving higher. Is Socrates bullish on the Canadian dollar?
Well, short term, you have basically it should be moving back up at this stage in the game. Short term wise, you got a bit of a bounce coming in here, but just be careful about it. August is going to be a very important turning point, and then your biggest, I would say, spike is probably going to be in January, but that's what our computer is warning about the first quarter of 27 for geopolitical crisis, in which case you'll get capital that even comes over into Canada.
Lucid, LCID on NASDAQ had quite the week. Any thoughts on it?
Not really. I think, these things are just short term. A lot of people are just confused, trying to figure out which way we're going on a lot of this stuff. But like I say, the bearishness has been so overwhelming. You create more of what we call a bear trap. That any kind of a rally tends to force short covering and things of this nature, which then gives you more of a bounce per se. But I don't see much changing until after August.
We hear about crypto millionaires and billionaires, but we don't hear about the losers. Are cryptos a very high-risk gamble?
Yes. Again, pay attention more to outside the United States. Europe wants to push through the CBDC because it's a way to control capital. You won't be able to wire any money out whatsoever. In order to do that, they would make cryptocurrencies, anything that they do not control, illegal. Bitcoin got famous mainly because all the volume was coming from China initially. And why? Because the Chinese figures they could buy Bitcoin and then sell it in New York, and they got the money out of China without going through a bank and sidestepping everything. And then finally the People's Bank of China called in all the Bitcoin people and say, wait a minute, you people are, circumventing the central bank. So I would be very concerned, particularly for what they're doing. In the United States, the Fed cannot create a CBDC because it would require a search warrant to even look at your account. So what you see in the United States are stable coins, which is the same economic model per se that Abraham Lincoln used during the Civil War. He allowed banks to issue currency if it was backed by government debt. So you can go online and buy some national currency. Each bank would issue their own. So a stable coin is exactly the same thing. A bank can issue, stable coins. It must be backed by U.S. Treasuries. So they have U.S. is more prone to go in that area because it creates a buyer for the debt, and it's the same model that Abraham Lincoln used. Since the Fed has admitted they cannot do a CBDC. Europe has no restraints. So, unfortunately, Canada will follow Europe.
In Canada, how important is it for people to get out of the cities?
Well, I mean, it's eventually, that's where most of your cities will turn more authoritarian. You see this developing in a lot of places. Even New York, for example. Adami is just he's creating a situation that's very, very serious, because eventually when his theories all fail, then the only alternative is civil unrest. And so the civil unrest is more likely in cities rather than in the suburbs. So I would just keep that in mind.
Where can our listeners follow you and attend your event on July 25th?
Well, the event will be in Tampa. It's basically for everybody. A lot of people are even sending their children down to get an education on this stuff, since what they're being taught in universities is appalling. And for our site, you can go to Armstrong.Economics.com, and you can buy tickets to that event there. Afterwards, we will have a video, and the textbook that they get for attending will be eventually available for people to buy separately online.
Martin, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jim. Take care of yourself up there.
You too. My guest has been Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, available online at Armstrongeconomics.com. Coming up, Jim Willie, next on This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Jim Willie, founder of the Hat Trick Letter, online at golden-jackass.com. Jim, welcome back to This Week in Money.
It's good to be back. I tell you, this is a very interesting time. We have a crisis pretty much on all levels.
Can you tell us about the Hat Trick Letter, how our listeners can subscribe, and how they can get a private call with you?
Sure. The website is www.golden-jackass.com. I'm in my 23rd year now. I've still got a great deal of energy, a lot of motivation for this. We're in a climax mode. And I've got a newsletter. I invite people to go to the website and sign up for the newsletter. I have time for consult calls. There is a donate button and a sponsor button for those who wish to support my work. I'm back in the United States, in the southeast corner of the U.S., doing well, dealing with heat, and today we're dealing with rain and lightning and thunder. So I hope the connection remains firm. Okay, it's golden-jackass.com. I'm available for consult calls. The newsletter is going great guns. I've got a lot of support from clients, and I'm very appreciative of that support.
Thursday evening, President Trump addressed the nation. What were the takeaways?
The takeaway, I believe, had three priorities. Election integrity, fraudulent activity within elections, and foreign interference with elections. In other words, election integrity. He's very concerned, and justifiably, about Democrat voting fraud. There's a joke, and that is a death certificate is sufficient identification to vote Democrat. There's a big fight going on with the Congress about SAVE Act. It's voter integrity. And I'm in favor of the SAVE Act. And it's interesting that Democrats are, I believe, 100% against in the Congress and the House of Representatives. They're 100% against voter integrity, voter identification, because they've got probably 15 million illegal immigrants voting Democrat, so they can continue their fraud and their votes, buying votes. The invasion force is Democrat. Okay, this is really pretty sick. But Trump emphasized election security. He emphasized foreign interference with China and the Langley folks at CIA by means of foreign military bases, NATO bases. He emphasized machine technology as being fallacious and defective. The finger is squarely pointed at Dominion Voting Systems, which has a new name now. It got forced into a divestiture, so a different company had bought it out, and now they're a more conservative organization that is very likely not to commit massive voter fraud on a systemic basis. Trump made an interesting point. He said national confidence is directly tied to voter integrity, voting election integrity, and the whole process being full of confidence. So national confidence is tied with voter integrity and election integrity. That's an interesting point, because I think that some of the polls out there are indicating that people don't want to vote because the vote doesn't matter, because the fraud is everywhere and the Democrats are behind it all. Okay, the message was short. The State of the Union address is typically 90 minutes. This one was 25. What we did not hear in the Trump speech was anything about the war. Nothing about the economy, price inflation as a result of diesel and gasoline. No mention of tariffs and that whole strategy. And no mention of London. I believe the London Center is the direct opponent that Trump is trying to defeat and displace and destroy, the London Center. And it's interesting that Trump was very instrumental in bringing about the resignation of Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister. Okay, so the message was pretty simple yesterday. We must have voter integrity and election integrity, remove the fraud, remove the machines that are responsible for the fraud, and get on with it. He did not mention anything about arrests for the Democrat-dominated big cities that control certain states. There are 5 or 6 of them that are well known. They're always in the news for voter fraud. Mail-in fraud, truckloads of photocopy mail-ins, and it's just absurd, the level of third world activity in the elections in the United States. We're a bit of the laughing stock across the entire globe.
What is the true global nature of the wars?
It's interesting to portray the enemy alignment. If you ask Trump, what are we fighting? What's the war? He will openly say, we're fighting Iran. But I believe he's fighting the London Center and the globalists. This is the globalist cabal trying to institute global fascism versus Trump and his nationalism, his Hamiltonian trade model. And that, in a nutshell, means you create political allies by means of strong trade agreements. So you cement your allies with trade. Okay, Trump is advocating nationalism, patriotism, and economic reconstruction, a return of industry. That is all in direct opposition to globalism. Globalism is about outsourcing the industry with the focus on China, reducing the industrial base, bringing about national bankruptcy, and taking over nations to install fascism with smart cities and a lot of controls, Big Brother, etc. If you were to ask Iran, what is this war about? It would say that their enemy is a little country in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean. I call it the little hat country. You know, we've had white hats, we've had black hats, we've had red hats. Okay, I add little hats to that little country whose name I refuse to name, whose name I refuse to cite, because anytime you make criticism of that little hat country, you're called anti-Semitic by a pack of elite master morons, master criminals. Okay, if they can't handle criticism, they shouldn't be seen in public, they shouldn't be heard in public, and they shouldn't be in our lives, period. Okay. If you ask Iran who the enemy is, they'll say the little hat country. They do not say the United States. They say the United States is acting on behalf of the little hat country. Okay. The real war is globalism and London and Davos and Switzerland versus the United States and Trump. Iran is a proxy state. Iran has a number of different features that serve the globalists of London and Switzerland. They are a trafficking center that's never in the news, both kids and drugs. They have nuclear programs that are very well hidden and underground. They have missile centers that are rolling out on tracks, and they pull back and are behind 100 feet of granite walls. You can't bomb them. They're very entrenched. Iran is also a gold center. A friend of a colleague of mine has let it be known, I've mentioned this before, that Iran is in possession of about 40,000 tons of gold, which is 6 times Fort Knox. They are also involved in gold theft, which was enabled by Hillary and Obama. They're also involved in nuclear. Let's just say Obama made available to Iran nuclear material, and Trump wants it back. I think there's also an element where certain databases, terabytes of data, are being stored in Iran regarding Epstein files. Okay, it's a very simple statement to make that Iran is a proxy state for the London and Swiss banker Satanists. And that's what this war is about. There was a really big hint a while back, like 2.5 months ago, where Trump said Lloyd's of London is out of the insurance business for shipping. Well, I think they're back. They might be in a reduced role. This is very interesting. This is not simply United States versus Iran. Not at all.
What's the latest on the escalation of the Iran war?
The peace deals, the ceasefire deals, are all interrupted by the little hat country, the southeast corner of the Mediterranean, the name that begins with an I and ends with an L and has no Z's in it. They continue to bomb Lebanon. And Trump has had some open arguments, a lot of angry exchanges with the president of that country, whose initials are B&B. I don't mean bed and breakfast. The guy is a barbarian. The guy is a Satanist, I believe. The guy thrives on war, and he is, I think, in full control by the London and Swiss globalist Satanists. So every time there's a deal struck, there's more bombing in Lebanon. And there is some damage done to the Little Hat country's military. I won't get into any details at all, but they are not getting off light. The escalation, I wouldn't exactly call it escalation. I'd call it continuation. It's hard to get any kind of a ceasefire to hold because 2 days into it, there's arguing over the language that was agreed upon, and there are renewed bombing attacks in Lebanon. This is a disgusting situation, and I believe Trump is eventually going to have to deal with the Little Hat leadership. But I've got some pretty good military intel that the security agency for the Little Hat country is going to deal with their own BB problem, and it's going to be quite interesting and full of intrigue. So look for perhaps a false story, an accident, a removal from power, possibly a death. I don't know. But I think they're going in that security agency that starts with an M and ends with a D. I think they're about ready to take care and fix their own problem. They're really angry at their prime minister for the massive destruction that has taken place in their homeland and in their military.
What's behind the continued Lebanon attacks?
Oh, just constant attacks to undermine the peace talks. It's constant. Look at the record. There are about 4 or 5 examples where there's progress, and then there's bombing in Lebanon, and Iran says, "You're not honoring your side, Trump." And Trump says, "Well, that's up north with the Little Hat country." And Iran says, "Yeah, but it's a problem." And Trump tries to put grease in the system by returning a quarter of the seized, not Bitcoin, but Tether accounts that Iran collected for passage fees for ships. Trump hired a London firm to do forensic analysis, and they identified and located a Tether account held by Iran. So Trump has returned some of that early to grease the system and get him to ignore the Lebanon attacks, but it can't be done. The attacks are too extensive. The damage is too horrible. The civilian killing is too widespread. And Trump is going to have to deal with the head of the Little Hat country and bring about a change in power.
What's the latest on the Strait of Hormuz and the passage of ships?
Okay, I got this from a military source, and I haven't heard anything in contradiction. I've only heard a few clients say, "Jim, that's crazy. All you have to do is listen to Scott Ritter and you get contradictory information." And I don't believe Scott Ritter gets much positive news. But what I'm hearing, and this is straight from the horse's mouth military source, the 22-mile wide Hormuz Strait has a western side that is controlled by Oman. It has an eastern side controlled by Iran. So just think of it as having at least 5 or 6 miles on the Omani side where they can have passage of ships. So what I'm hearing, and this is emphatically stated by the Florida wingman. I said, I'm hearing that there are at least 20 ships being escorted by the U.S. military under the guise of the International Maritime Association, and they're getting free passage, unobstructed passage on the Omani side of the strait. And he said, yes, you hear that correctly. They're not being hit by attacks. And it's not 20, it's more like 30 to 50 ships per day. And I said, okay, that would be confirmed by the lower oil price. Now the oil price has gone back $10. The diesel price is increased by $1 per gallon, all in the last 2 weeks. It's because of the escalation by the Little Hat country in Lebanon, which is a real big problem. They love war. They sustain war. They want to continue war. They have certain goals that are just not possible regarding Iran. They don't want just regime change. They want to obliterate their ability to have any kind of a nuclear program or to have an economy that functions. Okay, it's not going to happen. So the passage of ships is happening. It's confirmed, okay, by my sources. And I think we're getting some more attacks. There are a number of different indications that some of the ships are being hit and are on fire. And I want to mention something that's really, really ugly and tremendously detrimental. The Iranians did not halt their oil production. They did not run out of fuel depot space. What they did is they dumped over 1 million barrels of oil into the Gulf so they could continue their oil production operations. They did not want the damage. They'd rather ecological damage to the Gulf, killing all life in the Gulf, instead of doing severe damage to their oil industry. Okay, this is very serious stuff. I don't know how Trump is going to get even credibility with Pakistan, the intermediary, the liaison for the peace talks. They're more like ceasefire talk. They're not dealing with peace. You need to stop the war. You need to stop the hot war activity before you have any kind of peace. And the Little Hat country is just not going to permit that. So they are the problem. They need to be dealt with. I don't know how much longer this will last, but there are a number of different Gulf Arab monarchy states that have pretty much agreed to investing in Iran, in rebuilding their energy infrastructure, rebuilding their electric plant production facilities, rebuilding whatever is necessary. The Gulf Arabs are trying to work out their own deal. It's one of the clauses of the peace deal struck by Trump. It's a $300 billion reconstruction investment in Iran and the Gulf region. And the Democrat-controlled U.S. press, liberal-controlled press, they're lying. They're saying that the United States has caved in and will pay Iran $300 billion in reparations for the attack. And that is just not the case. It's investments by a number of countries, including India, UAE, Qatar, for $300 billion inside Iran for reconstruction and bringing them back into some kind of a workable, functioning form. And, it's just extraordinarily difficult when the Little Hat country up north is doing constant bombing. So they're receiving a steady stream of missile hits in the Little Hat country, in the mainland. Air Force bases, research buildings, apartment buildings for generals, you name it. They're all getting hit. Okay, this is a very bad situation. Trump has got to find a way to control or work with the security agency of the Little Hat country in order to stop the bombing that is earning retribution of missile attacks in their homeland. Okay, this is very, very dire situation. Trump's got to do something extraordinary in order to get back to the talks, the peace talks at the table. More like, the negotiations at the table. It's very difficult.
In view of the removal of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, how does the future look for Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney?
It's hard to say. I think he's well entrenched. I think he has the support of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is terrible. He's got support by an external military force. He's got good support by your parliament. And I don't think the parliament represents the people anymore. I think they represent the globalists. Keir Starmer is on the way out. He had to resign, but it's not immediate. He gave a song and dance of how the Labour Party needs, I think it's something like 3 months. I'm not certain. I think it's 3 months to pick a successor. But I don't think the successor is going to be any better. I heard the fellow's name, and I can't remember it. He's in line for like an easy win with the Labour Party. He's a Labour Party leader right now. The big differential, the big distinction that I see, Jim, is that Mark Carney is a globalist made man, and that's a mafia term. Made man means blessed, protected, defended, and entrenched. Keir Starmer is not. Keir Starmer might be offered up for execution in order to say, well, we've dealt with the Epstein problem, and look what we've done. We've executed Keir Starmer. More likely he'll retreat somewhere like to Northern Ireland or something. I don't know. I don't know. Mark Carney seems entrenched. The only way I think Mark Carney has a dismal future or, let's say, a decline in his future would be if Canada has an economic and political collapse, which I think could possibly happen. Canada is in far worse shape than it was before the war. The United States is in a weaker position before the war, but not in a position to actually fall on its face and collapse. Canada is in a position now with England, China, and Western Europe as its trade partners, and a very large piece of something like I heard some figures. I don't remember how much it is. Several $1 billion a day in U.S. trade, and it's all at risk and could be interrupted. Mark Carney, you must realize, Mark Carney is a made man. He went over to England and was the Bank of England chairman, and that made him a made man. He's going to be protected, and the only way he'll go down is if all of Canada goes down. Okay, we've got a delay in the action regarding Alberta. We've got some compromises from Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, and we got a vote coming up, and you got a threat by Carney to use emergency powers and to annul the referendum. And I believe there are over 20,000 Chinese troops in Alberta now to make sure that there'll be a lot of pressure for no separation. They might actually be on orders, the Chinese in Alberta. And, some people don't believe this, but, get real. There are Chinese troops in Alberta invited by Carney. He's invited an invasion force. I believe they could possibly begin assassinations of Albertan leaders. Very bad situation for Canada. I don't see an easy resolution. I think we're probably heading toward a parliamentary upheaval and a political collapse based on lost taxation and inability to roll over debt. It's a very complicated situation.
The Chinese invasion force inside Canada, what's the latest intel?
I heard 2 months ago that there were 17,000 Chinese troops. I heard a couple of weeks ago that Carney invited several more thousand to buttress the anti-separation force. If he declares emergency powers to annul or put aside the referendum for separation, it can be enforced by the Chinese military. And I believe they have some cyborgs in that invasion force.
In the U.S., are sanctuary states the home of massive inherent fraud?
Inherent fraud and treason. The illegal migrants, they don't have proper documentation. They were invited in. Many of them are criminals, not all of them. Some of them are actually decent people. but I believe perhaps the majority have criminal records or of violent types, and that's why they're directly invited to cause problems, to rape women, to assault people in public squares. We're talking about California, New York, Illinois, which is Chicago, Minnesota, and there's more. I believe that Colorado is a sanctuary state. There's also Oregon and Washington State. Those are sanctuary states. So there are about 8 sanctuary states. They're engaged in treason. I think you might possibly include Massachusetts with Boston in that group. I would like to see the governors warned and then arrested for treason. And if investigations are done, I believe that most of those sanctuary state governors are involved very heavily in massive fraud with NGOs and USAID. Now, for those who aren't really aware, an NGO is a non-government organization. And what we have noticed in the last 10 years, and this is brought out very closely by the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, and the AI efforts with Elon Musk, the sanctuary states are very involved with NGO fraud. And what the Biden show and the Obama administration, both of which I think were illegitimate, what they did was they set up NGOs under the guise of being of general benefit to the country and with federal structures, but they were really globalist entities to encourage the deep state rooting, the globalist infiltration, and setting up of a Marxist system. And I know a lot of people find this really hard to believe, and I do not care, but hear me clearly. Obama set up a Politburo in the United States government. What he used was the Inspector General's office, a fellow named Horowitz at the time. Horowitz, Irish Catholic, right? Horowitz, Irish Catholic. What he did was he had superimposed over the executive, legislative, and judicial, which is courts. The legislative is Congress. So Congress, the courts, and the president were all put under the control of the Inspector General. And Trump has never mentioned this, but I think he's been dismantling it by forcing the retirement of Horowitz, that Irish Catholic fellow. And this needs to be reversed. Okay? Now, that's just one thing that was done, but the NGOs are very important. The federal programs to assist the migrants with education facilities and daycare facilities and counseling facilities. I would say probably 3/4 of those funds have been stolen by Democrat, mafia structures, state by state. Okay, so the sanctuary states are not only involved in treason to harbor illegal immigrants, but the Obama and Biden judges are making decisions to interfere with enforcement of the law. What we're getting now is not only are the sanctuary states with governors who are committing treason and fraud. I focus on treason more than fraud. The fraud is secondary. The treason is primary. They're ignoring the rulings of the Supreme Court. And there's a big battle going on right now at the highest level of courts. Highest level. Okay, I want to see the sanctuary state governors arrested for treason, and 10 of their pack of fraudulent captains arrested with them. And that's what this investigation is all about in California. Governor Newsom is running scared. There are 2 insider moles in California who are assisting the Department of the Department of Justice. And ironically, the investigation against Newsom was started by the dead man, President Biden. For those who don't know, he was dead all 2 of the 4 years. People need to wake up. They need to wake up. Put a picture of Vice President Biden next to the new Biden supposed presidents, not the same fellow. And that's now a front page story, but a lot of people are ignoring it, including the mainstream press. All right. I want these sanctuary states to be brought to heel. Start with California, New York, Minnesota, and Illinois.
The next meeting for the Fed will be July 28th and 29th. President Trump wants lower rates. What do you think will happen?
No lower rates. War is back on. Risk is back on. We need risk off. We need risk off. We need lower price inflation. We don't have either. And this is working into the hands of London and Swiss globalists. They want constant war. They want the price inflation to be significant. They want no rate cuts. They'd like to see a collapse of the financial markets. They want to see a $100 oil price. We might get it again. I hope not, but we might. Do I think the Fed is going to cut rates? Not anytime soon. Okay, so much depends on a resolution and end to this war. So much. The crude oil price, the diesel price, gasoline price, electricity prices, the planting season, the size of the harvest for planting this October, trucking businesses. We might see some bankruptcy of national trucking business chains, fleets. I think the financial markets are at risk. I firmly believe London wants to see a collapse of the U.S. economy, a collapse of the financial markets, a collapse of small business, so they can come in and impose their socialism, which is just a kind word for communism. Trump's trying to make that clear to the morons to the left. They don't understand that socialism is communism and it doesn't work. Not a single example of prosperity under socialism in the last century. Lower rates. I have a theory that when we do get some peace talks, we do get the little hat country under more control of the fellow initials VB, we might have a very rapid economic recovery. We might see another sharp decline. Notice how sharply the decline was for the crude oil price. I outlined this in the June report that was out 2 weeks ago. The price for oil went down from something like 90 to below 70. Okay, and it was very quick. It was 10 days. This could happen again. If it happens and it sticks, and Lebanon is not bombed, and Iran doesn't do retaliatory strikes on the little hat country mainland, if it sticks, and if their security agency that begins with an M and ends with a D, if they can do something about BB, maybe we'll have a quick recovery. Maybe we'll have a sudden decline in oil price again that goes farther. Maybe we'll have price inflation that really bottoms out, and we could have a Fed rate cut. And I make this little prediction. Warsh, the new Fed head, gives no indication at all of a rate cut. He's giving maybe like a framework that if it happens, if a pathway, if it happens, and is followed, we could get a rate cut. But I think, and this is my little contribution, I think he talks a lot about productivity bringing down price inflation, the prices generally. I think he's going to bring about a Robert Rubin-like a hedonic adjustment to the top line inflation figure that is AI-based. So an AI-based hedonic top line adjustment to the price inflation index. It's not a laughing matter, but I do believe that there are a lot of complications that I discussed in the newsletter regarding this whole prospect.
Data center expansion with legal hooks. What are the hooks?
These are complexities regarding the data centers. Their funding, for instance. It looks very clearly like the funding of data centers is being done by BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street pension funds. So you could say that the people are funding the surveillance state centers with their own retirement funds. And that is a sickening thought, but it looks like it is happening. Other legal hooks are that Trump has declared, and this has not been played out yet, he's declared the data centers to be military installations, which means if you have a lawsuit by a local city or state, it might not go anywhere because there's no military jurisdiction for that data center. I will say that we do have one case. It's Casper, Wyoming. That's not, exactly the heartland or metro center USA. The population of Wyoming is less than, I believe, Rhode Island. They got one congressional member, and their population is about 500,000 people. But they do have two senators, and one of them is involved very closely with the Clarity Act. But the reason I bring up Casper, Wyoming is that they had a court case where the data center, which promised to have a closed-loop water system, they did not. And they had pollution of the water table for the local environment, and they got shut down. There's another setback came from BlackRock itself. And that's where one of the hints came out from Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. He said the retirement funds under management will be used to construct the data centers. Well, there's a big data center. I'm not sure exactly where it is. I think it's in Virginia. I'm not sure about that. And it's a giant data center. There's three types. Kind of small, regular size, and giant. And the giants are like 3 times larger than the regular size. BlackRock backed out of the funding on one of the giant centers. Now, it could be that they couldn't find sufficient employees to do the construction. It could be that they didn't believe that they had water access for supply. It could be that they expected to get some local jurisdictional battles from cities and metro areas. But they've done something brilliant, these data centers. They've gone after the small rural communities, offering them baseless promises of jobs and taxes, and they probably won't get either. And this is evident that Nino Rodriguez pointed out. He's in El Paso, and back in, I think it was May, he showed the Rio Grande was completely dry. Now, it was early in the rainy season, I get that, but he claims that the Los Pasos data center by Meta, which is Facebook, which was 180, 200 miles north up in New Mexico, was using all of the water. And he raised the point that if the Rio Grande is dry, then everything going all the way up to that New Mexico center, the Facebook, is also dry. So there's no farming and there's no ranching on that 200-mile stretch. Okay, this is the prospect that we're facing. I've heard something, and I haven't heard too much in follow-up, which is interesting, which means it might not be the case, but maybe later we'll hear it, and it's something dire. And that is that the data centers might be declared sovereign nations. And that could go parallel with the military installation status. If that's the case, then battles over noise, which is significant now. People are beginning to complain about headaches and noise, the constant hum, a high-level volume hum, and it's interfering with sleeping patterns to people nearby the data centers. If there are battles over water, battles over noise, battle over, natural gas supply for running turbines, if they're sovereign centers, all these objections and legal cases will go nowhere. So this is a very dangerous juncture right now.
There's a growing pushback against data centers. What do you think will happen?
Just what I described, funding reversals. Maybe there'll be more water legal cases to shut down temporarily the centers. I'm also hearing that they are short on information tech employees and experts and service technicians, IP technicians. There's a shortage. There might be a shortage on chips. And this is an interesting point, the chips.
Have AI stocks seen their peak?
They've certainly seen a big turnaround. I showed in the June newsletter, and people, I think, would benefit very seriously to sign up for the newsletter and learn more about the details of these, and not just simple talking points and a little bit of detail. But if you add together the FANGMAT stocks and add to them Oracle, NVIDIA, and Broadcom, which had a merger, if you add them to the FANGMAT stocks of Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Tesla, okay, the major players there are Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Those are the major players. And Facebook, if I didn't mention that. They had combined, those 10, FANGMAT plus Oracle, NVIDIA, and Broadcom. They had, in a 30-day period leading up to about mid-June, in a 30-day period, they had a $2.6 trillion market cap decline. Okay, so you could say that it's an effect of risk on with respect to the war. You could say that it could be a pushback for difficulty in employment, difficulty in funding, difficulty in legal cases, local opposition. I tend to believe that they are a bit too aggressive in their plans, and they cannot follow through with their speed of implementation and construction. There are limitations on chips, limitations on IT workers, limitation perhaps even in copper supply. I think there's going to be some pushback in ways that we do not understand and do not have brought to the table yet. But the AI stocks, they certainly had a major come down. $2.7 trillion is a lot of money. $2,700 billion come down. And the worst one of all in the hit was Microsoft. I pointed this out. I had a bar chart, each one. Microsoft had about a $550 billion decline. So almost 20% of the entire decline was Microsoft. Microsoft is having a problem. It is a departure problem, an evacuation problem, an incentive problem. Microsoft is having their employees drawn away by other companies like NVIDIA that are offering stock options that Microsoft is not matching. Microsoft and Apple are each having an employee problem, a small exodus that could get worse. Maybe that's part of the problem for the data centers. I don't know. I don't think that's directly involved with the data centers. But what we might see is a recovery in the stocks, and then a few months from now, we might see yet another $1 trillion decline in the FANGMAT plus 3. And I mentioned NVIDIA because they make graphic processing unit chips. And I mentioned Oracle because they're involved in data centers. They're not a FANGMAT. So they don't get the Langley Narco funding like the FANGMATs do.
Are AI investors migrating to other sectors?
Yes, it seems quite clear they're migrating to the semiconductor sector. There's a big come down in the AI stocks, and there's a big increase in the stocks, SOX, the semiconductor index. A big increase in the semiconductor index of stocks. Now, I believe that also will have a bit of a come down because I'm hearing about certain companies that are having an interruption in supply, input supply, like Micron, which makes memory chips. And it's just an entire assortment, a palette of chips and memory chips. And, you know, the semiconductor index is not just processing chips; it's memory chips also. Micron was a big red flag a few weeks ago. I think that what we're going to see pretty soon is the semiconductor index come down also, especially if this war continues. I got to say this. Everything is depending on this war.
Gold and silver have been in a downtrend since peaking in late January this year. Where do you think gold and silver go from here?
They go flat. They bide time. We had an interesting technical bullish signal in the last few days. The 200-day moving average for silver is crossing over the 50-day moving average. It's called a bullish moving average crossover, and it's noticed, but it doesn't stop the risk on trade, and that is to sell precious metals and to buy energy. We need something to stop this war.
Is there risk of an entire global economic collapse?
Yes, but let me just say that gold and silver will have their day, and it'll be soon. It's not now. It's not this week. There's still very strong indicators and factors favoring gold and silver. No doubt about it. The government debt, the silver industrial shortage, electric vehicle batteries, missiles. But it can be very confidently stated that if this war extends for several more months, we could see an entire global economic collapse. We could see an entire financial market collapse. We could see small business sector collapse. We could see some very serious problems even for the funding arm of the data centers and a near collapse. We could see very serious risk in certain political centers. I don't expect we will see several more months of this war continuing, but we must do something to stop the little hat country from bombing the shit out of Lebanon every time there's progress at the peace table. There is a global risk of economic and financial market collapse. Yes.
In the hat trick letter, you get into controversial subjects that we're not getting into in this interview. Where can our listeners subscribe to the hat trick letter, and how can they get a private call with you?
Let me list some of the controversial subjects that I discuss with people one-on-one. It's trafficking issues and how it affects the economy. It's issues regarding the military that are doing rescues of kids. It has to do with med beds that are under military control and not ready for the public yet because the underground war is still raging. It's raging under California and it's raging on the Northeast. Just call it the Maine and New Hampshire-Vermont border with Quebec and Ontario. It's still raging underground there. I get direct reports from military sources about kids being rescued. I don't talk about anything like that in shows. I try not to, get focused on that. I also talk about things like the Epstein files and various things regarding trafficking and political connections and maybe substitutes regarding congressional members. I would be very happy to discuss the gay blade, Lindsey Graham, the war hawk, and his death and some of the theories behind that. I'd be very happy to talk about the doubles in the Congress. Just to start off with, we're on the third version of Fetterman in Pennsylvania. Are people noticing that they're not the originals, or are they too dumb and unalert? Did they not notice that Biden did not have the same face as the vice president from years before under Obama. People need to wake up. So I talk about things that people are missing. I talk about theories that I have regarding the MSM News that I believe is doing a very slow motion movement. I could talk about some of the military scuttlebutt regarding New York City. So sign up for the newsletter. There are a lot of things that we could talk about that I don't discuss in open lines like this because these are public shows. And I don't want to put my risk and stick my neck out in a public show where I might get retribution. I might get some very harsh treatment. I might get actually shot out or run over. So sign up for the newsletter, sign up for a consult call. I'm at golden-jackass.com. I'm the editor of the newsletter. I call it the Hat Trick Letter, but it's the newsletter on golden-jackass website, golden-jackass.com. I'm in my 23rd year now. I still have a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of capability, a lot of sources of information. I've got a lot of colleague contribution. I get a surprising, very deep, positive contribution from 20 to 30 different clients. I call them my elves. I call them my research assistants. You know who you are. I'm very grateful for your contribution, especially TC in Northern California. You know who you are. Some of them send me 15 to 20 items per week. They are extraordinarily helpful. Most of them are more helpful than some of my direct colleagues. My direct colleagues are still really quite solid, but they're more on one-on-one questions and, put together theories. And I actually talked to two of them. Two of them, I think, were killed. We're in a war. I'm involved in a high-risk business. And so far, I'm unscathed except for very serious fraud and demonic costs from Costa Rica. I don't recommend anybody go there. If anyone thinks of setting up shop to do a business in Costa Rica, you're just walking into a meat grinder. The fraud is extensive, it's multi-layered, and it's in every different government agency in Costa Rica. They stole 9 years of my life. A couple of people were directly involved, close to me. I talk about things like that with the consult call. But, the newsletter is going strong still. And there is some damage from the economy. And, Trump calls this the strongest economy we had in decades. But I think what he's trying to say is we got the strongest stock market that we've had in decades. And that could change very suddenly if this war continues. So pretty much everything depends on ending and resolving this war, which means everything depends on corralling the little hat country and their BB leader. Everything depends on halting the bombing and violence in Lebanon. And that risk is the economy, the Western economy, our financial markets, our small businesses, our trucking industry, and household bankruptcies. Defaults on credit card lines, they're way up, way up. Okay, we need a resolution to this war. I think Trump got hoodwinked. He was told we can have a quick war. Iran can be defeated quickly, and that is just not the case. I never believed Iran could be defeated quickly. They've got a lot of fortification. They've got some natural defenses. So sign up for the newsletter, do a consult call, make donations. If you're very wealthy, hit the sponsor button. I still got a few people that hit it. We're in a bad situation, Jim, and Canada is 3 times worse.
Jim, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
It's been my pleasure. I wish we had better news, but the speech last night was promising, and I got to say something that I overlooked. I do expect the U.S. military will be involved in conducting many, many states' election process for custody of the voting results and for obstructing any attempt for outside interference, foreign interference, and for obstructing any attempt by the CIA using NATO bases. NATO is basically a narcotics are us business with a war arm. It's going to be interesting. I expect we're going to get military overview, oversight, purview, control, supervision of the election process. Trump is setting that up with the speech last night, but he's got to make some calls to Tel Aviv.
My guest has been Jim Willie, editor of the Hat Trick Letter, online at golden-jackass.com. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Martin Armstrong, and Jim Willie. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of How Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen.